Good evening. My name is Araksya Karapetyan, and I'm the chair of the ANCA Western Region. I want to thank all of you for being here and accepting our invitation to attend this film premiere tonight. Thank you to our Reverend clergy, the Primate of the Western Diocese, Archbishop Vruir Tadevosian, representatives of the Consulate General of the Republic of Armenia to Los Angeles. Thank you for being here. Elected officials, Council President of the City of Los Angeles, Paul Krikorian. Thank you, Paul. And supporters and concerned citizens. Thank you all for being here. On behalf of the ANCA Western Region, we are grateful to see you all here tonight to view this important film by our dear friend and colleague, Vruir Tadevosian, who really poured his heart and soul into his mission to give voice to the children of Artsakh as they face ongoing threats and fears for their safety, security, and their future. At a time when the Armenian nation once again faces an existential threat from Azerbaijan and its big brother Turkey, we must do all that we can here in the diaspora in order to replace cold geopolitical calculations with an unwavering defense of humanity and human rights, to replace unhindered aggression and hate with justice, accountability, and the rule of law, and to replace hopelessness and despair that we're all feeling with an unyielding resolve and a commitment toward a peaceful and brighter future for our people everywhere, and especially our people in Artsakh. For the ANCA Western Region, this is a top priority. We spend every single day of every week pounding on the doors of policymakers, influencers, journalists, and government officials, making our case for the rights of the people of Artsakh, who have so valiantly fought for decades for independence and peace. We are with them, always, and we will always remain with them. We are determined to use every possible avenue to make our point, and today's film is really just one of those tools that is available to us. We're truly grateful to Vruir for giving us the honor and privilege of hosting this film premiere, and I'm certain that you will all be in awe of our young compatriots in Artsakh, as Vruir has so beautifully captured both their resilience and their determination. I would also like to thank Professor Hannah Garry, who is the new Executive Director of the UCLA Promise Institute for Human Rights. She is a powerhouse in the world of law and international human rights, and she has graciously agreed to join the panel discussion that we will have after the film, as well as our beloved Araksya Karapetyan, an award-winning journalist and news anchor for Fox 11 News here in Los Angeles, who goes above and beyond the call of duty in terms of telling our story, telling the Armenian story, her story, to millions and millions of viewers all around the world, both locally through the news here as well as across the internet. Thank you, Araksya, as well, for agreeing to MC this event and also to moderate the panel. They will be joined by Vruir Tadevosian, who will talk about the film and the whole process, as well as our ANCA, our very own ANCA Western Region Executive Director, Sarkis Balkhian. And I think it will be a very important discussion for all of us to hear. I'm sure you will be moved by what you see in the next 45 minutes of this film, and by what you hear in the ensuing discussion. We each have a role to play in this fight for justice, and I encourage you to follow our ANCA Western Region social media platforms for specific action alerts and things that you can do. Being here is one of those things. Just raising awareness is one of those things that you can do. So thank you again for being here. I'd like to invite Araksya to the stage so that she can introduce the new film. Thank you.
Thank you, Nora, and thank you, ANCA, for having me here. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for taking time out of your busy lives to be here. It's my pleasure to help navigate the program tonight. Here's the plan. Nora mentioned it. I'll say a few words, just my thoughts, and talk a little bit about the film. Then we will watch the film. It is just under 45 minutes, I believe 43 minutes. Immediately following that, we will invite Vruir Tadevosian on stage, as well as Professor Garry and Sarkis Balkhian on stage. They will say a few words, and then we will have the panel discussion, the Q&A. You will have an opportunity to submit some questions in a written form. And if you do that, I ask that you can also include to whom you're directing your question to, just to make it clear for us. And hopefully we'll get some of your questions answered. We'll do our very best. So I had the pleasure of talking to Vruir about this film and doing an interview with him back in December, so a few months back. And I put together a piece which aired on Fox 11. Maybe you saw it on television, or maybe you saw it on social media, because oftentimes it gets more of a push when it's on social media, so on Instagram or Facebook. If you had an opportunity to watch it, it was a really nice interview. But if you didn't watch it and you haven't seen the film yet, we're about to change that. Hopefully you will have this opportunity to really understand what it is that he did and what the mission was behind his cause. I also want to take a moment to say what a special documentary this is, because it has the potential to reach audiences far and wide, and I think that is our ultimate goal. In everything that we do in our community, we have to keep that in mind. That is something very important to bear in mind. Telling stories in a way that connect people, that these are things they can relate to, it stirs up emotion. These are the ways we can get our message effectively across. So I think we have to be mindful of that. We gather together, we work together, we share many things together as a community, as a diaspora, but there also comes a time where we also have to invite and welcome other communities in. To do that, though, requires a lot of time and energy and patience and engagement, and most importantly, I think it requires a lot of creativity. I say creativity because it's something I noticed, and I'd like to share with you why. During the time when the war was actively occurring in 2020, I myself was very busy generating stories and coverage for the 44 days and for the many months that followed. And I had to work really hard to think outside the box, to come up with ways to cover the story that was interesting, appealing, unique, and different, because my audience wasn't the Armenian community. My audience was everyone else. So simply saying, something terrible is happening on this side of the world wasn't enough. Simply putting out statements from political leaders and elected officials talking about what a terrible thing was happening on its own simply is not enough. It takes everyone and everything to make the noise, to really draw attention to what's happening. And we cannot expect people to care about our cause, and fight our fight if they don't understand what it is that they're fighting for, or if they don't even know who we are. So that is why it's important for us to be creative in how we reach out to others in the communities. The documentary, like this, Tales of the Blue Sky, chronicle the lives and the experiences of children, and it really shows how war can impact children. And children are innocent, of course, right? Through the eyes of children, you really get to see the world in a very different way. Now, if you have children or you've had interactions with children, many of you, of course, have, you know that they see things very differently. They're very simple, they're very clear, and at times I envy that, because there's no consequences and no complications. Even with my own children, they're so direct, no hesitation, get right to the point, no games, very honest, sometimes too honest, but the point is, it's quite sobering. So they cause you to think about what's happening in the world in a different way, and they challenge you to think outside of the norm. And I appreciate that very much in children. Vruir's project here gave these children a space and a voice to express themselves. And so this documentary is going to illustrate the reality that is occurring right now. And he's going to talk about the fact that right now, 450 million children, 450 million children around the world are living in war zones. Think about that reality. That is their reality. And that is the highest recorded number in the past 20 years, and much of that has to do with the war in Ukraine. But nonetheless, that is just remarkable. So while Vruir visited these villages, you're going to see how these children have become victims of what's happening. They don't have a choice. They're forced into the situation to experience the terrible circumstances of war, to experience loss. But most importantly, I think what breaks my heart is to see that they are losing their innocence and their childhood in the process, right? They're losing the simple, fundamental, basic things that children should all experience, which is joy, laughter, stability, comfort. Imagine waking up every morning and not knowing what lies beyond your window or your front door. Waking up in fear, living with this constant unknown, constant ceasefire violations, one day you have school, one day you don't, the danger that is constantly lurking in the horizon. But despite all of this, you will also see that their spirit is not broken. And these children do learn to adapt. They learn these survival techniques, and they learn what to do in case of an emergency. Very different kind of a case of emergency than what our children here at school are taught. They've just gotten used to this type of life, but still they have the imagination, they have dreams, and they have hopes. So the title that Vruir gave this documentary is very moving, because the blue sky is something all children should experience when they look up, to see a blue sky. They shouldn't be seeing a gray sky. And my hope, and I know all of our hope, is that the clouds will pass and the dust will settle, and that every child who looks up will see a bright, blue, clear sky. And may they live in peace someday. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to bring you this film, The Tales of the Blue Sky by Vruir Tadevosian.
Պատուհանից որ նայում եմ այնտեղ, արդեն սկսում եմ վախենալ երբիկից։
Ժողովուրդը մի քիչ վախեցած է, մի րոպեվա ներեցին։
They survived war. They once were driven from their homes. Now, the blockade of Artsakh pushes them towards hunger. Ripped apart by war and genocidal blockade. They want to tell you the story of war and peace through their eyes. The Tales of the Blue Sky will take you into the worlds of these children. See their world, hear their truths. Let them take you into their wondrous worlds. The Tales of the Blue Sky, Chronicles of War-Impacted Children. A documentary feature movie by Vruir Tadevosian.
I hope you enjoyed the film. The music, the soundtrack is really beautiful and very moving. I meant to tell you that, Vruir, I haven't had a chance yet. Okay, so I'm going to bring each of our speakers up. They have a few words to say, and then following that, we're going to be setting up for the Q&A and discussion. So please don't be distracted. Vruir, if you can slowly start to make your way up here, I'm going to give you a proper introduction. Many of you know who Vruir is, of course, an international journalist from Armenia. He's worked for prominent media organizations like Radio Netherlands Training Center, non-governmental organizations, conducted research on freedom of speech and democracy. In 2015, he was elected as a free media ambassador to Armenia by European Youth Press for his critical role in Armenia's largest media outlets, such as Public TV and Radio Company of Armenia. He has lectured hundreds of young journalists, mentored many of them in Armenia, while serving as a lecturer at the Russian-Armenian University there in Armenia. So currently, based in LA, working as a leading TV host, news anchor at Horizon Armenian TV, which is the largest Armenian media network in the United States. Please give him another warm welcome.
Before I will start, please, one more warm and loud round of applause for my dearest friend, Araksya Karapetyan, award-winning German actor, who did this vision of the movie from the very first moment I told her about. Thank you, Araksya. Thank you so much. Ես իրականում ամեն անգամ, երբ ֆիլմ ավարտվում է, դժվար կարողանում ինձ համակել, որովհետև սա այն ամենածանր պատմություններից մեկն է, որը մարդը իրականում պիտի համարձակություն ունենա խոստովանել նախ ինքն իրեն, որ ինքը այո վնասված է, հետո արդեն ավելի մեծ տեսարանին օգնություն խնդրելով ոչ միայն իր համար, այլ հայրենակիցների, այն նոր սերնդի, որը նորից անցնում են այս ամենի միջով, բայց թույլ տվեք ես անցնեմ անգլերենի, որի համար պատրաստվել եմ եւ պատմեմ նաեւ այս պատմությունը. So, dearest, honorable guests, dignitaries, my friends, thank you all for being here. The chronicles that you watched are the stories of children who never had a choice. They were forced to witness life-changing events, war, tragedy, loss, injury, and chaos, since they first opened their eyes to this world. The same happened to me back in the 90s. Being a child of war myself and having to live the first 5 years of my life in underground bomb shelters in the borderline village of Choratown, under sounds of explosions and soil raining from above, I felt a calling to bring to light the horrific tragedies that children experience, often in silence. I didn't know what blue skies were, because all I saw was darkness, and what I thought were falling stars were actually missiles. And yet, we were told that we were living our best childhood. In fact, till this very day, I still dust off my bed the same way I used to dust soil off my bunk. The scars I carry today remind me of my past, what was, and what could actually be my best childhood. Having experienced my own journey through war and trauma, at the start of 44th-day Artsakh war, I came to the frightful realization that an entire generation will go through the same horrors. That was the moment when I felt a calling to give these children a voice. That was the inspiration behind the movie, which has now come to life. When I traveled to Artsakh a year ago, it was impossible to form a plan of action. I knew that with the whole crew, we would constantly be targeted by the Azerbaijani armed forces. I had a good idea about the existing problems we would face, but never imagined the support and assistance we would receive from fellow Armenians in Artsakh to help make this film happen. These kids and their parents are waiting for the world to see their truth. I want to express my deepest gratitude for everyone who has helped fulfill the promise to our children. So many of you have helped me to produce this documentary with everything from donations, large and small, to even writing this speech. Thank you. Warm round of applause to all of you. You know who you are. Thank you. You and people like you are the ones that are going to fuel this documentary to become a movement. I would now like to express my deepest special thanks to the champions of the Armenian cause, the strongest, the powerful, the united, the ANCA Western region. Warm, loud applause for them. Ladies all are individuals who have devoted decades to the endeavors of the ANCA Western Region Office. In recent years, others have come to truly grasp the significance of the ANCA Western Region's efforts in championing the Armenian cause and safeguarding pan-Armenian interests on this side of the globe. You may not know this, but there are people in this room, even probably sitting next to you, who have had a significant input in every resolution passed in the US Congress, as well as different levels of state and local governments across the Western United States. Let's give a well-deserved round of applause for the dedicated team at the ANCA Western Region, led by Chairperson Nora Hovsepian, its board members and staff who have advanced adapt for decades. Thank you for organizing this event. Let's also give a round of applause of the principal positions adopted by our elected officials like Paul Krikorian, who recently led the LA City Council effort to designate the intersection near the consulate of the genocidal regime of Azerbaijan in Los Angeles as the Republic of Artsakh Square. Thank you. As we witness the escalating humanitarian crisis in Artsakh today, where a pregnant woman had a miscarriage due to malnourishment, a man was starved to death, students traveling to Armenia to continue their education were kidnapped by Azeri forces and illegally detained for 10 days, the importance of this documentary has heightened. Also among us are many non-Armenian friends and allies. You may not be familiar with the history of Artsakh or the layers of the Armenian-Azerbaijani conflict. However, you undoubtedly recognize that the 30,000 children in Artsakh who have no stake in the conflict and have no say on how it will end urgently need our support today. Our mission is to amplify the voices of the most vulnerable, our children. We portray the war crimes committed by Azerbaijan through the lens of the children of Artsakh as we communicate a global message. The importance of protecting children in times of war. This documentary captures the deeply personal stories of these young heroes, highlighting the daily fears they face and the infringement on their rights. Our aim is to support an entire generation marked by the tragedy of war. Even after war ends, its scars remain. The children of Artsakh require not just material support, but also psychological and social assistance to navigate the challenges life throws at them. This initiative is not a fleeting one. The more eyes we have on this field, the better we can assist these children by raising global awareness and shifting from just a documentary to action, to a movement. I call upon everyone here to be the ambassadors of this message. While I have received invitations from 6 countries to showcase this documentary, its widespread impact is contingent on financial support. We have opportunities to reach audiences in Canada, Spain, France, Cyprus, Israel, and multiple states across America. The Veterans of Armenia Foundation has stood with us since the beginning, offering invaluable support, and we have representatives here. Please, another warm round of applause for them. We welcome tax-deductible donations for this documentary and the children of Artsakh through Veterans of Armenia 501c3 Foundation. So let's fulfill this promise together. I call all of us to action. Again, wars will end. The blockade sooner or later will also end because we are doing a lot for that. But the trauma will remain. Let's help end the sufferings of another generation. Thank you. Before I leave, I would like to express my profound gratitude to Professor Hannah Garry. Thank you for being here. I hope and I'm sure Araksya will bring detailed introduction to you. Thank you so much.
By the way, Vruir, you have a stack of recognitions to take with you, and I'd like to thank those of you who have brought those recognitions so we can pass along to Vruir. So Assemblywoman Laura Friedman, California Senator Anthony Portantino, Mayor Glendale, Dan Brotman, LA City Council President Paul Kokorian, LA City Council Member Hugo Soto Martinez, LA County Supervisor Catherine Barger, and Congressman Adam Schiff. Well deserved. Professor Hannah Garry, thank you so much for being here. It is my pleasure to welcome you. Professor Garry is the Executive Director, UCLA Law Promise Institute for Human Rights. She's a scholar, professor of international criminal law, and is on the faculty and advisory committee of the USC Shoah Foundation Center for Advanced Genocide Research. And she has practiced as a senior legal advisor in cases involving genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity for the past 20 years or so, including before the International Criminal Court, the Yugoslav Tribunal, the Rwanda Tribunal, and the Cambodia Tribunal. In 2022, she was a U.S. Fulbright Scholar at the Vruir Court Center, University of Oslo Law, and together with experts from the University of Oxford and the University of Toronto, she has filed reports alleging crimes against humanity in Cameroon with the ICC's Office of the Prosecutor in 2022. And I could go on and on and on, but there's just so much to say with all of her accomplishments, but at this point, let's just give her a warm welcome and give her the podium. Professor Hannah Garry.
Well, thank you so much for those kind words and warm welcome. It's really such an honor to be here and to be invited to this screening. Vru, I just want to congratulate you on such a moving documentary and piece that you have done, which I think is so very important for helping the rest of the world truly understand what is happening. And I just want to say that what first drew me to the work that I've engaged in over the years is actually speaking to children in refugee camps in Ethiopia and South Sudan. And you know, the trauma that you have captured and the ongoing tension and fear, you know, that comes through so strongly. I heard about and witnessed, you know, with children in refugee camps who were then forcibly recruited in front of my eyes to be child soldiers to fight back in Sudan. So I well understand what you experienced, you know, talking with children in Artsakh for this film. But what I want to also recognize is your resilience as someone who has experienced it yourself, and to applaud you for what you're doing. And so, as was mentioned, I have the deep honor of being the new executive director of the Promise Institute for Human Rights at UCLA Law. Prior to that, I was at USC Gould School of Law, where I started the very first International Human Rights Clinic. And when Nora invited me to come speak, I had to say yes because her daughter Arav was one of my superstar students. And she and I worked together to speak out when the war in 2020 broke out. And so the reason I joined Promise, one of the reasons I joined was because of the mission, the stated mission by Dr. Eric Israelian to use the Institute with its scholarship and its research and its education and its policy work and advocacy work to really come alongside refugees and those who've been subjected to the most serious human rights abuses, and to come alongside them in seeking justice and to equip the next generation of human rights advocates. And that really is what I'm all about, and why I have been working with law students now for almost 15 years in advocacy with regard to, especially to atrocity situations. So I was asked to just, in my brief remarks, say a few words about what Promise is doing at the moment with regard to the Lachin corridor blockade and generally with respect to the ongoing, serious human rights violations and attacks. I would, as an international law scholar, one of the things to note is because of the ceasefire agreement, right, we still are in a state of armed conflict, and so there's ongoing, atrocities that amount to war crimes, potentially crimes against humanity. And what we've been deeply alarmed about with the blockade is that the warning signs are there, right, for genocidal intent. There is clear risk of genocide, risk of ethnic cleansing. In my previous life, I worked in The Hague for 3 years in the Yugoslav and Rwandan tribunals, and what we're seeing in the Lachin corridor very much reminds me a lot of some of the cases I worked on around Srebrenica and Bosnia. And just whenever you see, sort of the restriction on freedom of movement, and whenever you see checkpoints like we've been seeing, and this struggle over the land and attempt to force people off the land, and then couple that with hateful rhetoric from the highest echelons of power, all of those are warning signs. And watchdog groups have been speaking out for years now with regard to the situation. And so at Promise, in the last month or two, so we've been doing a couple of things. We had a group of students who were in Armenia this summer doing fact-finding as part of the University Network for Human Rights. So UCLA students went on the ground as part of an ongoing fact-finding that has been going on for about 2 years now with other universities such as Yale and Harvard and Wesleyan University. And students have been going and doing in-depth interviewing with over 100 different individuals who are victims of, or family members who have family members who are victims of forceful disappearance, forced displacement, extrajudicial killings, torture, and just documenting and coming alongside the efforts of human rights groups in Armenia who have been documenting, and then also doing verification of gathering of data through open source data collection. And so the report is being put together now and will be launched later this fall at UCLA, and so you would all be warmly welcome to that report launch. But in the meantime, with the immediate crisis with the Lachin corridor and the blockade, we, together with the University Network for Human Rights, issued a briefing statement about the preliminary findings from that fact-finding, and also submitted a letter to the Special Advisor on Prevention of Genocide, just outlining how the facts are clearly demonstrating that the UN atrocity risk framework and the risk factors that we look for the most serious human rights abuses are definitely present in the region, and just backing that up with facts. So we've submitted that letter a week ago now to the Special Advisor. Other things that we're doing is we're holding an event on October 10th, which you are all warmly welcome to, with Promise Armenia Institute at UCLA, where we will be featuring Juan Mendez, who was the former UN Special Advisor on Prevention of Genocide. He issued a report as well last month, noting with alarm the situation and calling for intervention, warning of risk of genocide. So we will be hearing from him. Also, my old colleague and friend Sheila Palin, who I've worked with in the past through the Cambodia Tribunal and the Yugoslav Tribunal, will also be on our panel. You'll also hear from other experts. So it would be wonderful to have you there. And out of that event, we plan to have some more action, sort of letters and items, including a letter to the Biden administration to stop the military funding being provided to Azerbaijan, and then also seeking to pressure corporations doing business in Azerbaijan. So that's another thing we're working on at the moment, and we will hold that event on October 10th. So I would, you'd all be warmly welcome to come. And then, the last thing I would just say is that atrocity prevention and prevention of genocide, pressuring countries like the United States and others to intervene and to uphold their duty to prevent genocide is something that is very dear to my heart. And last December we had a side event around the International Criminal Court's Assembly of States Parties where we were featuring Armenia alongside Ukraine and also Cameroon, where I've done some work where there are clear signs of potential genocidal intent, and talking about the duty of countries, not just to prosecute and punish in the aftermath, but obviously to prevent. And part of prevention, I would say, and we can talk more about this when we discuss together, but is, I think for the Latin corridor and what's happening right now, it's important for the world to understand the larger context of that and the historical context, and it's not always clear to outsiders what's happening there. And from my perspective, the ongoing lack of accountability for war crimes that have already been perpetrated, the killings, the torture, the detentions, is a reason why we're seeing what we are today with respect to the corridor. So I'll just end with that and look forward to the discussion. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Mr. Garry. And lastly, many of you know Sarkis Balkhian. Please come on up. I've had the pleasure of working with him for a while now and have the pleasure of him accompanying some interns to the Fox 11 studios recently. Hopefully it's turning into like an annual tradition. We can continue to do that. So Sarkis is the Executive Director of ANCA Western Region. He's a political human rights advocate focusing on the Middle East and the South Caucasus regions. He was previously working at USA for You and HCR, the UN Refugee Agency, Human Rights Watch, and many other places. So he does hold a MA in International Relations from Yerevan State University, a BA in Political Science with a concentration in Holocaust and Genocide Studies from Clark University.
Thank you, Araksya. Maybe some of you can sit down. I plan to speak for another hour. No, I promised Araksya I'll keep it very brief. Professor Garry adequately presented many of the important international legal frameworks and tools that us as advocates of high-thought justice and human rights need to use to stop Azerbaijan's ongoing genocide against the Armenians of Artsakh. But let's be completely honest. In any protracted humanitarian crisis, lawyers, politicians, advocates, journalists, even human rights defenders and activists often become desensitized to terms like genocide, annihilation, massacres or ethnic cleansing, or even numbers like 120,000 civilians, 30,000 children, 20,000 elderly, or even 2,000 pregnant women. But behind every single digit, every single number, there's a person, a story, a journey, a collective history, and an aspiration for a future life free of tyranny, starvation, and yes, massacres and genocide. That is the very essence of the invaluable work that journalists like Araksya and Vruir do, as we witnessed tonight through Vruir's documentary. He humanized some of the numbers we have been hearing as well as repeating for the last 9 months of the illegal blockade of Artsakh by Azerbaijan, as we continue to advocate to our elected officials and public officials to stop a second Armenian genocide as the former chief prosecutor of ICC, Luis Moreno Ocampo, recently coined. I have to be very frank, as Professor Garry mentioned, most people in the world don't understand what this situation is about. For the most part, they present it as a conflict or war between the Republic of Armenia and Azerbaijan. And if we're honest, the majority of Armenians, I believe, also don't understand the roots, the legality, the international context of the conflict of the Artsakh movement that started in 1988, starting with the massacres in Sumgait, the pogroms in Baku, Girovabad, continued through the war until in the mid-90s, and in reality, the Armenians of Artsakh have been witnessing constant terror and attacks from Azerbaijan for the past 35 years. This is not a situation that started on September 27, 2020. And in fact, when November 9, 2020 trilateral statement was signed, the war did not end. That piece of document is not a ceasefire because every single day since then, Azerbaijan has been terrorizing Armenians in Artsakh, as well as invading the sovereign territories of the Republic of Armenia and occupying it since May 2021. But for decades, I have to be also honest here, many years ago before I joined the ANCA Western region, I've worked with ANCA for the last 15 years, but sometimes I was very critical of their pursuit or having Armenian genocide recognition as the top priority. But for decades, as ANCA Western Region and other advocacy organizations, as well as hundreds of thousands of Armenian Americans over the years, have advocated to US officials to officially recognize the Armenian genocide at all levels of government. That endeavor was not a self-fulfilling prophecy. That endeavor was, in fact, a pursuit to ensure that the legacy of never again that was formulated after the Holocaust becomes a reality not only for Armenians in Artsakh today, but for all people who are being oppressed and slaughtered and becoming victims of genocide around the world. But today, in hindsight, while I was critical at the time, thinking that the priority should have been the right of self-determination and recognition of Artsakh rather than Armenian genocide today, in hindsight, the reality is very different. The fact that President Biden, we are very appreciative to President Biden, who is the most powerful man in the world, conjured up, quote-unquote, the courage to recognize the Armenian genocide in 2021. While we appreciate his recognition of the Armenian genocide today, as 120,000 brothers and sisters in Artsakh stand on the verge of annihilation, on the verge of a second genocide, we send one simple message to President Biden. If you continue to remain silent, if you continue to not act and back up the statements that Secretary Blinken and Acting Secretary Assistant Yuri Kim, who gave a testimony earlier today at the Senate Foreign Relations hearing, if you do not translate those statements into action, you are unfortunately going to become complicit in the genocide of the second genocide of the Armenians at the hands of the tyrant of Baku Aliyev. So we urge President Biden to take action, affirmative action, sanctioning members of the Aliyev regime for all the war crimes and crimes against humanity that they have committed over the last 3+ years and possibly even 3+ decades. Because otherwise, he will whitewash his own legacy and courage of recognizing the Armenian genocide. Thank you.
Shall we begin? So, I think we have the questions that you've submitted, but before we get to those, Vruir, I'll turn to you as a fellow journalist. I already talked about the importance of telling stories and why that matters and the connection you have with people. As you made this documentary, and I'm looking into the audience, I see Emmy Award, who's become one of my favorite people, a documentary filmmaker herself.
She's one of the first viewers of the movie.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Nice.
She watched it on December.
Ani, of course, and the legacy of her father, Vruir Tadevosian, whom we all loved and adored and will continue to remember. I spoke with Ani, and speaking with her, I realized as a documentary filmmaker, you go into a project and you have a plan, you have an idea, right? But sometimes your subject matter or the people you come across will take you in a completely different direction than what you had intended. Did you find that to be the case when you picked up that camera and went out to interview those children?
Yes, it happened with me as well, because as I mentioned in my speech, I had that imagination of what I wanted to film, what I want to capture, because basically that was my childhood. That was the way I grew up. And I knew what I would film, but I never had any imagination of how would be the outcome, what would it be. And then we couldn't form any plan of action, but there on location, I understood that these children will not let me fail. They helped me. They took me through their tales. They took me to the places where humans are not going. And this was the moment one of the kids were telling how they moved, how they Alen Gasparian, I think you impressed and you were laughing. He was telling how they changed the village, how they moved from another village to the current village where they reside. And his story was like, it was impressive. I would gather all the kids together, and start listening to them, and start realizing on location who is my hero, who would summarize all the tales told by different kids. And that's how I chose these kids who were speaking. That's one thing we never planned. And when Alen started telling that he doesn't like the village, he misses his old village, and then I realized that this is my hero. He has a story to tell. And another story in another village, a man, you will see a handicapped man, a war veteran, met us and said like, I have a son, he will come, he will tell his stories, he's 15 years old, he will meet. And then first were coming the schoolmates of that boy, and then he says, oh, this is my son. And I was looking, where is the small kid, where is the kid, and I go like, no, this is a man. And he started telling his story, the story of the father, and he was 13 years old when the war started, and he had to take his family. They had to run together, and he had to help. And then I again realized that this is my hero. This is the one who needs to tell and talk to the wider audiences. So yeah, that's the case.
And the audience who you are presenting this film for, who is your audience? Who do you have in mind?
One more, I just remembered one more story when the kids gathered in the village of Murishan. They go like, who are you? Why do you want to film us? I go like, the world will see you. Let's talk with us. And oh, who in the world? I go, there are people in the United States, there are people in different countries that are waiting for this movie to watch you and learn about your reality. And they, then we will speak. So I promised them, and I want to fulfill this promise with your support. Thank you so very much again. And I want to take this movie to the wider audiences, to show our story. As I said, as I mentioned, there are so many non-Armenians around us, even here, and I'm sure this small piece gave you understanding about our story, our history, and the layers of Armenian-Azerbaijani conflict. And this is why I want to take this movie to the wider audiences, to tell our story and to ask for help for the children in Artsakh who, after the war, will need support for sure.
Before I ask my pre-prepared question, I haven't shared it with actually Professor Garry, but Eddie has cards and pens, so anyone who wants to submit any questions, they can grab a piece of paper and pen, submit it to us. Professor Garry, I think most Armenians were very encouraged by former ICC prosecutor Luis Moreno Ocampo's report or expert opinion on the ongoing situation in Nagorno-Karabakh, where he essentially described it as an invisible genocide. Could you analyze or give your take of his report and the arguments that he presented as it pertains to the international community's responsibility to take action to not only prevent genocide, but as he framed it, to stop the ongoing genocide that is already taking place? Could you elaborate more on that issue?
Well, thank you for that question. So, just a little disclosure. So I've known the former prosecutor for quite some time, and I think one of the good things about his report was really helping the public and the world to understand that genocide isn't just about thousands of people being killed, right? So that's a common misperception. And so that report was really critical in underlining how there is, under the Genocide Convention, this idea of what we call slow death, where conditions of life are imposed on a population that are calculated for their destruction in whole or in part, but over the long term. And as you said, it's invisible sometimes because you're not seeing the horror of what we, know about the Holocaust or the 800,000 that were killed in 100 days in Rwanda, right? And so the report highlighting how tactics around withholding of humanitarian aid and starvation and a blockade that restricts freedom of movement can also be a genocidal act. So that was a really good piece of the report. And whenever you see acts like that, of course, then that is indicative of the other part of the Genocide Convention, which is establishing the mens rea, or the intent behind the acts. So his report was, clearly calling it a genocide now in motion. There has been controversy around that, as you may well know. Simply because with genocide, the difficult part, and now I'm speaking as a lawyer, is that it's a very high bar for proving genocidal intent. And you have to we don't make that allegation, you have to make it carefully, you don't make it lightly, because the real linchpin, what makes genocide under international law the worst of the worst, is the intent behind those acts, right? So genocide can be killing, it can be, serious human rights abuses that cause serious physical and mental harm as well, and trauma. It can include these tactics of slow death that we are seeing with the blockade. It can include as well, prevention of births within a population, and also transfer of children, or abduction and transfer of children to the opposing side, like we're seeing in Ukraine, right? So those are the acts. But what really makes genocide genocide, the horror of it, is this idea that a certain group can declare itself God, if you will, and decide that they have the power to destroy a whole other group and wipe them off the face of the earth. That's genocide, and they have that intent behind those acts. And so that's serious. That's a really serious allegation, right? And so in the law, you have to really, not always are perpetrators going to explicitly say that that's their intent. So then you have to deduce it, you infer it from what's happening with the facts. So the part about the prosecutor's report that was challenging was the facts behind establishing that intent. And I think that certainly, as I said before, the warning signs are there for all of us who study genocide. The red flags are there, and all the genocide watchdog groups have been speaking now for a couple of years, raising the alarm bells, and there hasn't been action. So I can understand why he did what he did, right? It really stirred up action. I think that the risk is there, the duty to intervene is there, and that's all that needs to be said, because under international law, that's enough. That's what's required. You don't wait for the genocide to happen to intervene. Under international law, the obligation is to intervene when those warning signs are happening. So I think that what I would like to have seen in all candor is more facts establishing the mens rea in that report. But nevertheless, I think it was important for really highlighting the acts that, again, there's a common misconception about what genocide is.
Yeah, I mean, I think as it pertains to intent, maybe this is a shortcoming of all of our collective Armenian institutions and our inability to explicitly demonstrate to the international community the rhetoric that comes from the highest levels of government in Azerbaijan, including, I wouldn't call him president, but dictator Aliyev, where he has engaged in systematic spread of hate speech towards Armenians as an ethnic religious group over the course of the last at least 25 years, since 1994. So I think that is a shortcoming on our part as Armenians, and we should do a better job on that. But clearly intent has been explicitly expressed from the highest levels of the Azerbaijani government. Thank you.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in, I think the other thing that can be done more is setting what's happening now in the context of the war for the last couple of years, but also the history of the Armenian genocide, right? And this is part of a pattern in practice, and that's what we as international lawyers look for, and in my mind, it's clear, right? But for the general public, for the world outside that don't understand the conflict, they don't make those linkages, right? But that pattern in practice is further proof of intent.
This question actually, both of you can answer if you wish. What do cultures who commit genocide or invasion of neighboring countries have in common? How do you think they justify these actions?
What do cultures?
Cultures who commit genocide. Examples, Turks, Chinese, Russians, etc.
Do you want to take that one, or?
Well, I don't know about cultures. I would just say that for different regimes or countries that have perpetrated genocide in the past, we see similar patterns of behavior, right? So extreme vilification of the other side as the enemy, and dehumanization, right? And that rhetoric, because you see it in all contexts, whether it be Rwanda or the Holocaust or Cambodia. There's that rhetoric that you were talking about of cleansing, of calling them animals, cockroaches or dogs, the dehumanization of the other that then allows for the rationalization of their elimination, right?
I would also add, I think, grooming the younger generation to think in that way as well.
Sure.
I think that was something that was quite shocking in 2020 and afterwards, even when you saw videos of young children in Azerbaijan, saying things that just absolutely shocked you, or just behaving in a way that, it was clear they'd been groomed and trained to think that way. The danger of carrying on that type of hate for generations to come.
Right. And so as part of that, a common thing you will see, right, is rewriting of the history books, a retelling of the narrative and the story, right, for the new generations, right, to come and to...
Our music, our food, our tradition.
Yes, and so then also what you see with attacks on cultural heritage or cultural objects that represent, you know, a particular group is also indicative. It's a red flag.
So how do you overcome that when it's not just, you know, the older folk talking about something that isn't true? Now you're getting into changing of the history book and teaching a child to grow up to hate one's neighbor. How do you overcome that?
Well, I think that the only way to overcome it is with truth, right? And better and more information, and that they're not being only in a silo hearing that particular information. But that's difficult, right? When they're in a country where there is a free flow of information.
I mean, if I may add, I think the premise of the question is somewhat flawed, and therefore it is difficult to answer, because I don't think cultures necessarily are the root foundation for any genocidal action. It is actually governments or institutions that actually end up engaging and perpetrating in any type of genocide. And for the most part, they use maybe cultural, religious, ethnic elements to propagate, like the Hutu power during the Rwandan genocide, like the Young Turks during the Armenian genocide. But ultimately, if you analyze it from a purely political perspective and even from a legal perspective, you see that governments perpetrate genocides to advance their own interests as governments, including the Armenian genocide, which was, and this is unfortunately heavily underreported by even Armenians, we perceive the Armenian genocide as simply the outcome of Turks hating Armenians, but the reality is it transpired in the context of the decay of the Ottoman Empire, the loss of huge amounts of territories, and the need for the Turkish race inside Turkey to establish a state in the new world order that was developing in the aftermath of World War I. The easiest path to accomplish that was to eliminate 1.5 million Armenians, Assyrians, Greeks, and empty out that entire territory from the indigenous population. And it's a very similar strategy that Aliyev is using today in Artsakh, where they need to eliminate the 120,000 Armenians of Artsakh in order to assume full control over the territory of Nagorno-Karabakh. And the best indication of that is the cultural genocide element that Azerbaijan has engaged both in Nakhichevan and in Hadrut, Shushi, and all the territories they occupied during the 2020 war, where they not only displace people or annihilate them, but they engage in the complete erasure of cultural and historical trace of Armenians in their indigenous lands. But I think the cultural element is not the primary.
I'm having a hard time reading this handwriting. I apologize if you can try to do better that question.
I am having the... Do you have any questions? I can try to...
Okay, you can try. Vruir, this one's for you. Okay. Did you ever feel you were in danger? Did you fear for your life? If so, how did you handle it?
Thanks for the question. The thing is, you never can handle it, and you never overcome it. Yes, I have that constant feeling of being in danger, but during the years you learn how to live with it. And thanks to my parents, despite remaining in the village, they still reside in the same village, in the same house. They prioritized our higher education, mine and for my sister. they prioritized our education and ensuring a better life for both of us. By the way, they are following us right now online, so thank you, parents. They nurtured us to be contributing members of this society. I think that's the only one option, and that's the only one way to overcome all the difficulties, traumas, and mental issues that you could possibly have after the war. That's the answer. Thank you.
Okay. You're still figuring out the mystery?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, the children refer to the Turkey in the documentary. Do they have an understanding of the country of Azerbaijan, the distinction that from Turkey? What is their knowledge of the Armenian genocide of 1915? Meaning, they're young children. Do they have an understanding of what they're saying?
Well, the younger kids they don't have any understanding of overall what's enmity, who is the real enemy. But the eldest kids, they do. They know what is the difference between Turks and Azeris, what is the difference between genocide and the ongoing situation. They understand it all because all of them are really good at history. They learn good and they study good. They basically have nothing to do other than reading books. But the younger kids, of course, they don't have imagination about the ongoing situation. They just know that an enemy is based 100 meters away. That is what they know, and they just feel the constant fear every day, every minute in a day. That's what they know about the history and about their and our enemy.
After you interviewed these children for the documentary, was there any form of therapy for them to deal with their situation? You talked about, sometimes trauma you endure, it's not physically evident, it's internal. So many of these children have these internal, demons or whatever you want to call it, they will have for the rest of their life. How do they deal with that?
Yeah, I think many of you would notice all the traumas. I have tried to pick the segments of their interviews where you can clearly understand the traumas, their traumas. The one had nightmares. The other one can't speak during the whole movie. All of us are begging him to talk, but he can't. The other one, when I'm asking about his brother who has been lost, missing in action, thank you. And he would tell everything, but when I'm asking about the brother, he stops and asks to stop the interview. And you understand, of course, that they have traumas, but also this is the worst thing. They don't have, there is no any option for their therapies. There is no therapy for them right now. I doubt that we would have that possibility even in the nearest future, but still, we need to work with them and for them. One of the funniest things, one of the kids asked, when I can see the movie, I go like, once it's ready, do it soon, he says. Do it soon, I want to watch us playing on the screen. It's like, they really don't understand what's going on, but they know what's going on. If you know what I mean.
If I can ask one question, I think even anyone on the panel, including Professor Garry, can answer it, because it's kind of two-sided. One is about media coverage, and the other aspect of it is the legality of the conflict and the premise. One thing we have witnessed, thankfully, since the ICC prosecutor Luis Moreno Ocampo's report came out is more media coverage of the issue, more international attention to the situation. Clearly, that was also coincided with the fact that on June 15, Nagorno-Karabakh, Artsakh went into a complete blockade with the halt of all forms of humanitarian assistance. But in the coverage of in the media, whether it's op-eds, including op-eds written by Armenians actually, we constantly see references to Nagorno-Karabakh as simply a conflict between the Republic of Armenia and the Republic of Azerbaijan. My interpretation of the situation is if the legal basis to the two conflicts, because there are two conflicts right now going on in South Caucasus. One is a conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia over territorial integrity, which started in May 2021 when Azerbaijan invaded the sovereign territories of the Republic of Armenia and has been occupying it since then. The other conflict is a matter of the right of self-determination of Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh, Artsakh, because the alternative to self-determination is ethnic cleansing or genocide. Why is the messaging both in the media and then also being used by the State Department to present the situation in the blockade in Nagorno-Karabakh as a part of the potential peace negotiation process between Armenia and Azerbaijan? Where are we going wrong with the messaging, especially considering the clearly outlined basis in international law?
I think is the question to you or
To me?
Yeah.
Well, for me, I'm dealing with local news. So mine is very different and challenging in that sense that I have to pretty much simplify a very complicated subject matter because this is local. The people unfortunately don't have the attention span realistically for what is going on. And then there comes the fact that in order to cover the story, I have to try to get creative and find a local angle to then squeeze in some other information that's actually useful and important. So there's just a lot there. And most newsrooms are just not going to take their time to do it. That's a fact. And people just copy and paste information. So if there's information that says, oh, there's a conflict, the word we don't like, that word is just going to get used and recycled unless someone's there to stop it. And that's why I always say it's so important to have more Armenians or representation in whatever field it is, not just in front of the camera, really behind the camera, because when you came with the interns, I was explaining this, the person choosing the video in the editing room, it matters what video is being shown, right? The photographer shooting it, the writer writing it, the soundbite you choose, whatever the interview is, whatever part you're choosing can change the entire context of that story you're writing. So there's so much importance in the people who are handling the subject matter have a good understanding of what it is, a correct understanding of what it is that they're covering. And you're not going to get that. I don't know what it is like on a national level or international level, and Vruir, maybe you can speak to that, but I'm just telling you from a local level. I feel like I'm constantly trying to make sure that there are no explosions, because there's constantly things that are written wrong, shown wrong, said wrong, and I have to put out the fires before it makes the air. But I'm on my own doing it, and it's just one station right now, or for me, speaking for myself. So I need more help. I need more help in that matter. But really, it comes down to for us as a community, having our message be succinct, concise, and uniform. We have to be on the same page so that people who are listening to us at least don't get confused by that. People are creatures of habit, and people are very simple. You just keep saying the same thing over and over, it's going to start to register. So we have to have a very clear, simple message that resonates with people, and people who are from the outside can understand.
Thank you. Professor Garry, if you can tackle that from an international legal perspective. Is it two conflicts, one between Armenia and Azerbaijan over territorial integrity and sovereignty, in this case, the sovereignty of Armenia being violated, and the second being the rights of the Armenian people of Artsakh to self-determine themselves, because the alternative being coming under Azerbaijani rule. And we have, I mean, one of the most underreported statistics about the 2020 war is actually almost 50% of the civilians, the Armenian civilians who were killed during the war, were killed in captivity of Azerbaijani forces, meaning they were abducted, kidnapped, and then executed extrajudicially. And we've seen similar incidents with a lot of POWs, including when Azerbaijan invaded the Republic of Armenia last September 2022, when they captured POWs, losing their role of combatant under IHL law, and becoming civilians and then being executed. Are there two conflicts? Is there one conflict? And why is there a problem with both media's interpretation of the two conflicts, if there are two? And why is it always being presented as Nagorno-Karabakh conflict needs to be resolved within the peace process between Armenia and Azerbaijan?
You mean as compared to highlighting that there's also the ongoing conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia?
Yeah.
Where there's two, in essence. You know, it's a great question, and I think that one thing that has really astounded me is the lack of framing around aggression with regard to attacks on Armenian sovereign territory. And I think when you talk about framing in the media, you know, everyone was shocked when Russia invaded Ukraine, right? But prior to that already had been the attacks on Armenia, and it hasn't been framed as aggression. And so I think that's a real double standard, actually, within the international community, and something that, again, with the framing and the understanding of the conflict, it needs to be fleshed out more for the general public. With regard to Artsakh, so I study international law. I'm not an expert on self-determination, right? But I firmly believe in the right to self-determination and exercise of that right. And I think that there's a real, I'm someone who has a lot of degrees and who has studied and who is interested in many parts of the world and tries to understand complexities like what's happening there. And even myself, it's a very complex situation. And I think part of the issue in understanding what's happening there is the lack of understanding around dissolution of empire and what happened with the dissolution of the Soviet Union vis-a-vis Artsakh and Nagorno-Karabakh. And the importance of that particular territory for Armenia and the identity of Armenians. So I would just say that part of the world understanding the situation is the critical piece of setting it in context, I think, with regard to why there is a struggle for the right to self-determination there, because it goes back to never being actually given a choice with regard to exercise of that right, with the dissolution, is my understanding, with the dissolution of the former USSR.
Thank you.
And I think this is going to be our last question. This is from Council President, Paul Krikorian. If you would like to read that, and I will answer your question about the media personally later.
There are dozens of situations around the world where there is risk of genocide. Regardless of legal obligation to intervene, there generally is none. Or am I reading it right? What are the common elements that will likely induce actual action by Western nations, including, I guess, the United States of America?
Well, sadly, the world's record on intervening in genocide situations is a very poor one, right? Unfortunately, with Rwanda, it wasn't until, it was so clear that the hundreds of thousands had already died that, finally the world was willing to take action and do something to try to intervene. And even then, it was a very poor response. In fact, there was withdrawal of peacekeepers and individuals were left to their fate. So I would say that unfortunately, we don't have a great history of states being willing to uphold their obligation to prevent genocide.
And I think Kofi Annan was the head of the UN peacekeeping operation of the United Nations in general. General Romeo Dallaire being on the ground, and then as I suppose a reward for the Rwandan genocide, Kofi Annan became Secretary General of the United Nations.
Yeah. And so, in the aftermath of that, of course, then the world set up these courts and tribunals to prosecute perpetrators, and that has often, unfortunately, been the way it plays out, is that as a sort of mea culpa, we'll have trials in the aftermath. I fully believe in accountability in trials, but why I'm so interested in for atrocity prevention is we need to, obviously this needs to be stopped upstream, and the states need to be pressured for intervention. So, there has been this whole doctrine of responsibility to protect and justification for use of force to intervene in situations by outside countries where there is impending genocide. Interventionally, states have not been willing to do so. You can understand that it's politically fraught to intervene with use of force in those situations. It's difficult. We all wish we knew why countries don't act, and there's a lot of political calculations, as you know, that go into decisions around use of force to actually go in and stop something from happening. I wish I had a better answer for you, but I think that there is more robust now attention to developing frameworks and helping countries, and the United States has the Atrocity Prevention Board, where there's an interagency process for trying to monitor and track situations around the globe that look like impending genocide situations, and to use various political tools as can be in the political circumstances to put pressure on the parties in the situation, but there hasn't been a perfect response so far.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. That concludes the evening. Vruir, once again, congratulations on your film and everything you've done so far and everything you're going to continue to do. We're looking forward to seeing that. Professor Garry, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. Sarkis and ANCA, thank you for having me.